Hello and welcome. I'm Mel, and I'm bringing you this In Conversation series, talking to lots of different people about eating disorders, disordered eating, body image, exercise, mental health, all sorts. They'll be running through our resources and also on YouTube as well, so you'll be able to check those out and hopefully you find them interesting and insightful. I'm here today with Hope Virgo, which I'm so delighted you're here. Thank you so much. I've seen Hope speak at various different eating disorder events before. She's an amazing campaigner with her Dauntless Scales campaign and author, speaker, general, all-round hero. So hi Hope, thanks for being here. I'd really like to start with just tell us a little bit about who you are, your experiences, and why you do this wonderful campaigning that you do.
Fab, thanks so much. And yeah, thanks so much for having me and for that, lovely introduction. I feel like, I don't really know now where to start. I'm like, oh. So yeah, I have been campaigning for probably about 4 or 5 years now. Um, I have a real passion around eating disorder treatment and care and support that people get. I kind of come at it from a lived experience perspective. So I grew up with anorexia from the age of kind of 12, 13. And it became such like a central part of my life and my childhood. And throughout my whole teens, it just served this real purpose to actually kind of keep me going, give me value, helping me to just feel good enough. Eventually, I was hospitalized when I was 17 and spent a year in an inpatient ward, kind of learning about food, exercise, and learning to just talk about how I felt. And I do want to emphasize, I think, like, I'm now 31, so I went into treatment kind of 13, 14 years ago. And back when I was in treatment, there wasn't this kind of rush for services. There was enough support out there. So I guess if you are watching this and you're kind of sitting on a waiting list or you're not able to get a diagnosis, it's really important that you don't compare what your treatment you're getting to actually the treatment that I got, because regardless of what treatment people get, actually every single person deserves that treatment and deserves a diagnosis and deserves to get well. Um, but yeah, I guess I spent that year in treatment kind of learning so many different coping mechanisms to life, learning how to actually kind of start to live a more normal life. And a big thing for me was accepting that something was the matter with me, kind of accepting that I needed to get that support. I think so many people who have eating disorders or an exercise addiction feel like what they're doing is normal, and we normalize all of those behaviors and they become kind of second nature to us. So I had to really kind of strip it all back and be like, actually, what I'm doing is not okay. What I'm doing is not normal, as well within that. So since kind of being discharged, I was in an ongoing state of recovery for quite a long time. I relapsed back in 2016, and that was when I tried to get treatment and couldn't get support because I wasn't underweight. And it was at that moment that I was just so angry and so frustrated and felt so totally let down that I was like, right, when I come through this, I need to find a way to really challenge this and to really change things. And that, I guess, was kind of the passion behind a lot of the campaigning work that I do. And now I guess I'm in a bit of an ongoing state of recovery. I do really, really believe that actually every single person can fully recover from an eating disorder. And that is something that I know is unbelievably difficult, but I do really, really believe that. And I think for me, I'm in these kind of like final few kind of phases of my recovery, I guess, where I'm really kind of challenging myself, really pushing myself, being really, really honest about actually where I'm at with things and working really, really hard to make that final break. And I think the thing that kind of has helped me to get to that point is, I guess, reassessing where I was at with my own relationship with food and exercise over the last year, but also kind of starting to really unpack what purpose the eating disorder is serving for me. Like understanding that actually when I have a bad day, I don't need to show people that I'm not okay. I don't need to get those feelings of being good enough by restricting or exercising more. But actually, for me, I can lie in bed in the evening and tell myself all of those things that I actually do want to hear other people say to me that maybe I don't hear enough of. And get into that space where actually I can kind of champion myself a little bit more within that without having to go back to those unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Yeah. Wow, you've been through such a lot, and learning how to be your own champion. That sounds, yeah, that sounds amazing. But as you say, it's ongoing work, isn't it? And that's,
Yeah.
yeah. So you said that part of it was accepting that there was a problem because so many things are normalized. Do you mind talking a little bit more about your process of what happened and how you managed to sort of start accepting that there was something there?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I went into CAMS, Children's Adolescent Mental Health Services, originally for about 6 months. And throughout that whole kind of 6 month period, I was in this massive amount of denial about anything that was the matter with me. I think the patterns of behavior had become so ingrained that actually whatever anyone said, all of those shock tactics that I feel like often people try and use to scare people into changing their behaviors, like none of that stuff was really working for me. And I spent kind of the first 3 days when I went into inpatient, kind of really angry, really frustrated, just not really sure what was kind of why I was there, what was going on for me. But on the Friday night, one of the nurses got me to do this exercise where she brought in these massive pieces of paper and she marked on the paper where my head was and where my feet were. And she got me to draw how I imagined myself. So I kind of drew this outline of my body. Once I'd done that, she got me to lie down on that exact same piece of paper. And she did this kind of trace of actually what I looked like, kind of going right up against my body. And I then had to stand up and look back down at that image. And it was at that point that actually I realized that there was something really, really wrong with the way that I viewed myself. And I
Mm,
was like, maybe something isn't quite right with my brain. And the only way to try and start to kind of test it was to start eating a little bit and to just see what was going to happen, how it would feel. And I think for me, the bad body image didn't cause my eating disorder, but it has got quite a few like intrinsic links to it. And I now know that actually, when I have a bad body image day, it's a projection of all of my fears, all of my emotions, all of the uncertainty, everything like that onto my body. But at the time, I didn't realize that. And so just having that evidence there, I guess, was like the first starting point to actually starting to think, oh, I maybe need some help. And then I think alongside that, like when I started to kind of get into quite a structured eating habit within the treatment, but also kind of since then, actually like realizing that when I am eating, like, and I'm eating properly, like actually I have so much more energy to do stuff. I don't have to constantly be thinking about food. I can go out with my friends, I can be a bit more spontaneous, and I'm not cold, like all of that sort of stuff that like I think quite often we forget that actually we need food just for that kind of day-to-day stuff anyway. And so for me, actually, once I kind of had that structure back and I saw this glimpse of actually what a kind of recovering life would look like, I was like, actually, I want that. I want to have the energy to do stuff. I want to have the chance to go out with my friends. And ever since then, it's just been again just trying to like normalize a lot more of those behaviors that maybe I'd put as a bit of a scary thing to do.
yeah, yeah. It sounds like then you had this kind of like you had this initial shift in perspective where you had the thing where you lay down. I've seen that done before, and I
Yeah.
guess you have to have a lot, some very big papers or stay get some big pieces of paper together to maybe be able to do it. It's maybe not so practical for people to do at home, but I think it's a really good way of maybe seeing that maybe if you're not quite seeing things in the right sort of way. I guess it wouldn't work for everybody because that could be really difficult for someone in a
Yeah.
larger body, and that strategy might not work. But I can see that that would work for a lot of people.
And I
And
think it
then,
is
yeah.
with like the body image stuff, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I do think that, like, obviously for me, it really, really worked. And I can totally get where you're coming from. But I think it's always then like actually asking ourselves, like, why are we getting so fixated on our bodies? Like, they they don't give us they don't give us worth, like they don't show that we're good enough at something. And I do think that because of society and all of the ideals that are created, we do put so much emphasis on our bodies. But I think, I guess the other thing within that that really helped me was actually realizing there was so much more to me than actually what I looked like and what size I was. So even like if someone doesn't feel able to do that exercise, it might be actually thinking, actually, what does my body do for me? Like what other things can I do? Like if I eat more, like, or if I eat normally, like actually, will I get more energized? Will I feel better about things? So I do, yeah, kind of finding other ways, I think, to reshape that whole kind of body narrative conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I suppose it was just an initial sort of shift in perspective to get you to think more about actually it's way beyond body image, because you also said about it being a projection onto your
Yeah.
body. When you have a bad body image day, then is it that, or is it actually that there's emotions going on that are being channeled into sort of the way you look, but it's maybe not actually about that? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I
Yeah.
think like now I'm able to understand that it just means that on those days when things feel slightly harder, I can literally be like, right, I might feel like this today, but actually, what is that feeling telling me? Like, what is actually going on for me?
Yeah. And maybe in a sense that it's temporary, and you have a toolbox to be able to cope with that now. It sounds like,
Yeah.
I mean, when you were younger in the throes of this, there wasn't. It sounds like you didn't really have those coping strategies then. So this recovery was sort of various stages of learning and creating like a toolbox and learning resilience. Is that kind of how it
Yeah,
felt?
exactly. Exactly. And I think it's those sort of, I guess, those toolbox techniques that we kind of can learn throughout our recovery. And I think that that sort of stuff again changes slightly, doesn't it? Like my toolbox was kind of quite small at the start when I first left treatment, and I would always keep going back to that. But actually, over time, it's definitely expanded. And I think one of the reasons it's expanded is because I've actually started to experience life and kind of, I guess, get less fixated on the eating disorder behaviors now because there's so much other stuff to do and other stuff that I want to do.
Yeah, and it was interesting that you said that there was once you got a sort of taste of what recovery might look like, you were like, "Oh, that's what I want to do." So
Yeah.
I guess having that can sort of then act as a driver to propel you forward the more steps you take into it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, definitely. And I think like I make it sound really, really easy. And like it was so unbelievably difficult, like getting, I guess, accepting that something was the matter and then getting to a space where I even felt like I'd be able to function like outside of treatment, and not being so reliant on that. And it's taken a lot of work and a lot of ups and downs. And like everyone was always like, oh, recovery is not straightforward. And I'm like, it definitely isn't. Like it's so kind of windy and turny, and life throws so much difficult stuff at all of us. Like I guess we've all seen that with the pandemic, that you then have to kind of keep kind of finding new ways to deal with things and new coping mechanisms. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think regardless of if someone's had an eating disorder or not, like we're going to be finding those other ways to deal with things, and that's normal. And we need to try and normalize, I think, those conversations and that behavior too.
Yeah, because you never know when we're going to get something like a pandemic thrown at us, and we need to adapt. Yeah, I mean, we were in somewhat in our world in quite a sort of mental health crisis, I guess some people might say. There's a lot of strain on the NHS. There's a lot of people struggling, and then through COVID as well, the impact on people's mental health now. I mean, we certainly saw it at First Steps and the other eating disorder charities as well. Had a lot more referrals during this time. It's been very
Yeah.
hard for people to cope. It's been a big, big trigger. Um, but just going back to, you were in hospital, inpatient for a year, which is a really long time. So I can imagine that you said it was quite, scary going back into the real world. How did you sort of manage leaving the hospital environment, getting back into the real world? What support did you have?
So I didn't have any support actually. Um, so I turned 18 when I was in treatment, and they let me stay for a couple of months after my 18th birthday, which again is something they would probably never do nowadays. But at that point, I just fell through that transition, which I'm sure a lot of people can really, really relate to. But I think for me, like I knew what I had to do to stay well at that point. I took my A levels when I was in treatment and decided to go straight to university. So I came out of hospital and then 2 weeks later kind of rocked up at Birmingham Uni and was like, right, I'm going to do this. And I think my main driver actually when I was in my first year at uni was I knew that if I got unwell, I would have to drop out of uni and I wouldn't be allowed to be there anymore. So it was that kind of that just kept me going. Um, and I was extremely institutionalized, in all honesty, at that point. I'd been put on quite a strict kind of structure with my eating. And so I just stuck to that kind of religiously. I had my meals and my snacks at the same time every single day and kind of tried to adapt my uni lifestyle around that, which was interesting. Um, I didn't probably really know how to live properly, in all honesty, away from that. But I think the real shift for me happened after uni. I went traveling for a year, and just being kind of away from stress and away from kind of other environments, and being in a situation where I was really happy, I was really relaxed, like I was just really chilled out about stuff. I was like, actually, this is working. And it was actually at that point that I thought I was fully recovered and thought that everything was fine and that I'd never get unwell again. And when I came back from that, I was able to still kind of listen to my body, not be kind of thinking about food and calories, like everything like that. And it really, something really shifted for me actually in that moment.
Mm. How long did you go traveling for?
About a year.
About a
Um,
year. Yeah. And where
yeah,
did you go? And I'm intrigued as to how you managed eating during that time after being on quite strict. So I've done quite a lot of traveling myself, and just think, oh, food wise, it just kind of like throws you, and depending on where you are
yeah,
as well, and stomach problems and all sorts that I had as well. So how did you manage that?
yeah. It was terrifying at first. So I went to Southeast Asia, and I lived in Thailand for about 6 months, and then travelled kind of around the rest of Asia afterwards. Um, in all honesty, I don't know how I did it looking back. I actually I seem to do really well when I'm thrown in at the deep end in these situations when I don't have a choice. So when I go for smaller, like shorter holidays, I actually find those much harder than I do the massive holidays, because I know that it's just a really short period of time that actually I can be a little bit more controlling. But yeah, I guess with the long stuff, I just had no choice. At first, when I lived there, we still kind of structured our day kind of around like meals and snacks and stuff like that. But I got a job there, and then that kind of made me a little bit more relaxed, I think. And I didn't have a choice about what I could and couldn't eat when I was working, because the food in the children's centre I was working was just provided. So I was like, right, well, I've got to have something. So because I don't have a choice, I'll just have to do it. And I think the other kind of added thing where I was living in Asia, it was a tiny village in literally like the middle of nowhere. So all of the food was like made totally fresh. And so you didn't have any idea of what was going in it, what you were eating, like things like that, which I think again really helped. I think one of the issues here um, in England and across obviously like other westernized cultures as well is there's just such a fixation on calories that you walk into a supermarket or restaurant and it's just plastered there. And whether you've had an eating disorder or not, you probably look at it a little bit maybe. But when you've had an eating disorder, you get so preoccupied with those numbers. So I think for me, just there being no numbers anywhere, I was like, right, I can't count, I can't control it like that. I'm gonna have to just see what happens.
Mm, that's really interesting, bringing yourself into a different culture with food and just having those sort of elements to it that had been quite difficult for you, just having that taken away. And as you say, and I mean, I've spent some time in Thailand myself, and it's all really, it's very fresh food. It's very different to how we eat here, which can sometimes be a bit of a shock to our system if you're traveling around Asia. Certainly was for me in India as well. My stomach did not like that. But I think it's amazing to have these, to experience the different ways that people eat. I
Crazy.
suppose it's interesting to put it in perspective and just think that the way that we eat isn't just the way. It's not, there's a lot of things that are normal, isn't there? Like the normal way is what you grow up with. And for me, that was seeing quite a lot of people on diets. And seeing people calorie count is quite a normal thing. And now with them talking about putting calories on menus and things, that's again a normal thing that's like normalizing things that are actually really harmful for people. I think for some people, I can only really speak from my own experience here, but I think that going traveling was also for me a freedom. And I think people said that it was escapism. Yes, it probably was escapism, but I think sometimes you need to take yourself out of your normal environment to be able to heal. So I found traveling very healing, and I found it very confidence building and built a resilience of like, if I can do this, then I can do anything. If I can go to the other side of the world, if I can survive in Thailand. Did you have any, or did you find it was quite confidence building like that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I remember actually when I arrived in this village in the middle of nowhere, and there was a massive lizard on the wall, and like I was so hot. I think I had food poisoning, and was just hating. I was literally hating it. I was like, right, I'm going to come home. I was like, I don't want to be here. And then my other half was like, no, like let's just stay. Let's just get through today. So I remember we like walked down to this like tiny supermarket and got, I think like just some cereal or something, and sat on the side of the road like eating cereal, and were just like both were just like, this is just so awful. But the next morning, like I kind of adapted a little bit more to it, and I think it did. I would say now I'm very adaptable in those situations. So, like, I go traveling a lot, well, pre-COVID, and I really miss it actually. But love different cultures, love meeting new people, love talking to people from a huge range of places and hearing their stories, what they've been through, everything like that. And it definitely, I think in that sense, definitely that resilience aspect, but taking you out, like you said, of like that situation maybe that's causing you stress and anxiety at home or in your personal life as well. And I think maybe that's something that's been really difficult this year for a lot of people, isn't it? Is like you end up just getting kind of trapped in a situation, and because you're trapped, you're maybe sitting with a lot of emotion that maybe you haven't always dealt with in the right way, or maybe you're trying to navigate still. And in those situations, for me, I'd probably book a holiday or go and do something. Because of COVID, you end up just sitting with a lot of that stuff. And I think positively, people are probably working through things maybe a little bit better. But then again, negatively, obviously, we've seen massive increase in services and things like that. So I think it is getting the balance right. Yeah, but it's good. And I think, yeah, I definitely think it makes you more resilient actually going and experiencing different things and seeing what else is out there.
Yeah, and like you said, more adaptable as well.
Yeah.
And building on any of these confidence, adaptability sort of things is going to be able to help you if you're exploring your relationship with food. And it gives you courage as well, because it does take courage to look at your relationship with food, or even to kind of have that shift in perspective to begin with, where I think, oh, I need to look at this, I need to work on this. And then that's a sort of ongoing thing for years sometimes, because our relationship with food is likely to change through our life with different life events.
Yeah.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about when you said that you relapsed. When was that? What happened there?
Yeah, so my grandma passed away in 2016, and I really struggled with the grief around her going, and could feel myself kind of slipping back into unhealthy coping mechanisms, but kept telling myself it's fine, I'll just do this for a little bit and then it'll be fine. But eventually it kind of began to take more of a hold. And so I referred myself to services, went for an appointment, kind of gave my entire back history, was really honest about everything that was going on for me. But unfortunately, because there wasn't space probably, but also because I wasn't underweight, there wasn't actually anything they could do for me. And I remember leaving that appointment and just feeling like a completely fake person. I felt really hypocritical that I tried to get support for an eating disorder and I didn't fit the mold that they were looking for. I was angry, frustrated, and I had like this 4 week period where I just was felt like a total mess a lot of the time. And I think coupled with that as well, a lot of shame and guilt around the eating disorder and the behaviors, and felt really like I'd let people down as well, and was like, why can't I get the help I need? Why can't someone just take this away? Eventually I did go on antidepressants, and went on medication for about 4 years, as a way to, I think, just give me a little bit more energy, and to kind of help like kind of clear the fog in my head a little bit as well, which definitely helped. And I made a massive effort at that point when I went on medication to start booking some really fun stuff in to do, kind of went back to quite a strict structure and routine with food. And became, yeah, I guess quite fixated on having all of those plans in place as a bit of a motivator to keep me going, as well. And I think probably after about a year or so, I was beginning to feel much better, actually, mentally, but also kind of physically as well. And felt like I was getting to a better space. But I do think that kind of since that relapse, I definitely kind of just settled at where I was at in my recovery and stopped kind of pushing and challenging myself to get to that better space. And when I started to talk a little bit more about what I'd been through, it was at that point that actually I realized that the fact that I'd been turned away from services wasn't an isolated issue, but it was actually something that happens to so many people, like every single day, just getting turned away from services because they're not underweight. And it's not the fault of the NHS. I think there's something kind of generally wrong with society, that we're still judging the severity of an eating disorder based on someone's weight, when we know that only 6% of people with an eating disorder are even underweight. But there's funding issues, there's educational issues, and it just really, really frustrates me, because I think if we got in there early, we know that people would be more likely to kind of get to a space. But it also means that there are a lot of people who are like functioning at like that high level with an eating disorder, who maybe kind of know something's not right but don't really know what to do, but just keep functioning because it's become so normal.
Yeah, it's become normal. And then society, culture, medical professionals, everybody else around them will also kind of keep normalizing that as well. After you were turned away from services, did you have any other eating disorder support? It kind of sounds like you just went at it by yourself after that.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I just thought I'm just gonna just do my thing and see what works. I think I was obviously extremely lucky because I'd had treatment before. So I knew about meal planning, I knew about having that structure back in place. And I went back to all of that stuff that I'd learned when I was in hospital, which really, really helped. And I think that's the thing, like, yeah, like I was lucky in that sense. And I do also have a support network around me. And I know a lot of people don't have that.
Yeah, it's really important to have your cheerleaders and your champions and your supportive
Yeah.
network around you. Um, And yeah, I'm sort of wondering then if there's any kind of like other things like things in your toolbox, like books, podcasts, whatever, that you also use during that time.
Yeah, so I read a lot. Have probably every single self-help book there is going around eating disorders, which I actually find some of them really helpful, some of them just quite interesting. I'm also very mindful, I guess, at the kind of social media stuff that I look at. So making sure that actually from a social media perspective, I'm not looking at content that makes me feel rubbish about myself, but not looking too much at unhelpful kind of eating disorder related content, whether it's diet culture stuff, whether it's just other people who maybe are struggling as well. Um, I also um, I also have a list of motivations. So I have a list of things that I want to be able to do with my life. It's a list that I first made when I was in hospital, but then a list that's changed throughout the last decade as well. And I actually made one recently, just after Christmas, when I was like gunning for full recovery, and was like, right, actually, I want to be able to do X, Y, Z. And for me, it's things like I love traveling, like I said, but I also want to be able to have a croissant with my children, like, not that I have children yet, but when I have children, like all of those sort of stuff, or going out for last minute meals with my friends. So doing a lot of those list making again kind of helps me to just keep myself motivated and keeps me moving forward. And then quite often as well, we'll kind of be checking in with myself and actually trying to work out actually in that moment, what do I really need? And sometimes, like I kind of alluded to at the start, like it is about lying in bed and telling myself off all that stuff that I want to hear, but also at points kind of taking a little bit of a step back, being like, actually, right, today I need to moisturize, I need to journal, I need to go to church, I need to connect with people. And actually just having some of those things kind of up my sleeve can be really helpful. But it's, again, I make it sound really easy and it's hard at points. And I think particularly with the year we've all had, and when you face difficulties and maybe you're going through a relapse or you're functioning, you're not really sure what's going on, it can feel really difficult to kind of go back to the basics in that and do a lot of those kind of what we would say is like kind of boring admin type things in recovery, but actually things that really, really help.
Mm. The admin is a necessity.
Yes, I agree. Otherwise,
And
life just gets so overwhelming.
yeah, I think that it is really important just to remember these basics. It's such a great idea about writing those lists. I think as long as those lists can be like updated, like you've been doing, like make different lists instead of having one.
Yeah.
I suppose because perfectionism is quite a sort of thing, isn't it, within eating disorders, like restrictive eating disorders particularly, that I suppose we have to be careful that we don't just put that perfectionism into something else, putting the
Yeah.
perfectionism into recovery of wanting to get there, wanting to rush along, wanting to do recovery in the right way, wanting to achieve things. Because I can imagine, that perfectionism would just get channeled into that instead. Do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think yeah, I've definitely had to be very careful. But even with things like journaling, like actually being totally chilled about what my journal looks like and not trying to make it this amazing masterpiece when it doesn't need to be. And I think as well, like making sure that we're not getting fixated and getting too rigid in those structures, whether it is all the coping mechanisms we've got in place, actually allowing some flexibility within that and constantly adding that variety in. Because I think for me, having that variety then stops the perfectionism kind of taking as much hold.
Yeah. So kind of thinking moving forward after that with your anger that you felt, you realized that you weren't the only one to be turned away from services for not being thin enough. And this is something that I've talked to many different people around, and it's a big problem. And obviously there's the wider social context and the brilliant campaigning that you're doing on that. But I'm also wondering for individuals, what can we tell individuals watching this? People who might have been told a similar story. I mean, of course, if they've come here and they've come to First Steps, I just want everyone to know that you can go to First Steps and you won't be turned away because your weight isn't low enough. That definitely won't happen if you go to First Steps, probably any of the other charities as well. But yeah, what would you say to people who are struggling as individuals who've had that sort of narrative?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is it's important to try and get back to your GP. And I hate saying that because I know that people probably have this huge fear of going back to their GP in that moment. But I do think it is about going back to your GP, trying to get on a waiting list, being quite forceful in getting that support. The second thing that I always say is important to do is actually going and getting your bloods done. So getting all of your levels checked to see kind of where you're at kind of physically as well. Sometimes bloods don't really show up much, but sometimes they will do. So just being aware of that. Um, I think as well, contacting obviously places like First Steps, but other organisations too, that might be able to offer you that interim support in that moment. And then trying to just surround yourself with people who are really championing you. I think it's so isolating having an eating disorder, and it's such a secretive illness that a lot of us get so stuck and so trapped in that kind of secrecy, and we feel a lot of shame and guilt and judgment when we start to open up about it. But I think if we can identify maybe one or two people to actually have a conversation with about it, it can help us to just, I think, get to that space where maybe we are a little bit more open, or we've got people who we can be accountable to. And when you do that, like actually working out what that support would look like, whether it is someone texting you around meal times, or someone offering you that distraction, or someone who maybe you can grab a coffee with once a week to check in with, just trying to work out actually how you can create that support network there.
Yeah. Did you go to anything like any support groups or anything?
No, I didn't actually. So I now go to a peer support group, which I love. I think one of the reasons I really like it is because it's online, which it just makes it a little bit easier kind of to navigate, I guess, all of those, yeah, I guess like a lot of the eating disorder thinking and thoughts and comparisons. Um, but I do think for some people, like the peer support stuff works really, really well. But yeah, I guess I never really found that. I think when I left treatment originally, like I said, I went to uni and I didn't want the eating disorder to be there then. So I was very kind of distanced in that sense from it as well.
Mm, mm. And did you have counselling, psychotherapy throughout any of that time?
Only when I was in hospital. I went back to therapy about 4 years ago and did like a 2 year stint with therapy then. Went privately actually because I couldn't get any kind of NHS stuff. And I now work with a dietitian. So have done kind of like a huge different range of therapy. And I do think that quite often with eating disorders, like people always think like, oh, they're so difficult to treat and people are really difficult. And I'm like, no, we're not difficult. We just have certain needs that need to be met, perhaps. So I
Mm.
think it's always worth actually trying really hard to find the therapy that really, really works for you as an individual.
Yeah, it's just trying it out, isn't it? There's a lot of different types of therapies, different types of therapists out there. Again, seeing like dietitians, probably a similar sort of thing, that there are dietitians that probably have more expertise about eating disorders. And I'd always kind of think somebody with using like a health at every size approach as well. People who don't tend to have a focus on BMI. I mean, any of these professionals is what I would generally think, because obviously we need to be moving away from using BMI, because it's not a good indicator of health.
No.
You certainly know through your Don't the Scales campaign. So let's talk a little bit about your campaigning. We'll be coming to an end soon, but I just want to cover your campaign and where you hope will go in the future.
Yeah, so I've got a campaign called Dump the Scales, which is all kind of started off being all around scrapping BMI, and making sure that people get the support they need. So I went in it from like a societal level to actually be like, right, we cannot be fixating on numbers and BMIs and judging it in that sense, but also then doing it from a government perspective to actually make sure the right support and the right treatment and funding is going into services. It so far has over 100,000 signatures. It's been picked up quite a bit in Parliament with kind of discussions, debates, things like that, which is really cool. But I still just don't feel like it's being taken as seriously as it should be. I think it's appalling that in 2021, like eating disorders still have the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric illness, and people are still dying like every single day because they're not getting the support they need. And so for me, it's like actually right now kind of trying to work to escalate it, to actually get the government to actually see this as a matter of urgency, as something that they need to take on board, they need to change and adapt to, because if they don't, people are going to keep dying, people are going to keep sinking into like this kind of really, really negative headspace, and it's just going to be really unhealthy. So yeah, I think where it's at the moment, I had a government roundtable 3 weeks ago now, where we looked at a list of recommendations to kind of pitch into the government. And kind of off the back of that, I've launched a coalition with a number of other experts to again look at actually how can we really bring this messaging together? How can we bring together both the physical elements, but also the mental health elements, also looking at the genetics and trying to merge, I guess, kind of like the heart with the mind, with the genes, like everything all into one, so that we can make sure that the right support is out there. I do think that actually we need a full reformation of services, because if we don't, actually people are not going to get well, people are going to keep relapsing, and it's just not right. So it's good. I think it's going well to some extent, but again, I do sometimes feel like it's just, yeah, the government just aren't listening as best they could.
Well, I mean, it's a big thing that you're trying to do as one person. Go and do this. I mean, it's huge. I really, really admire your ambition. And it's great that you've met with, various different MPs and have had, I suppose it's about honouring the impacts you've had so far, because you have had an amazing impact so far. And I'm sure you'll keep stabbing away at it. It's such important work. I mean, and I do find that for some of the, other kind of campaigners and things that I've spoken to, we've talked about how anger from our own experiences isn't a bad thing, because anger drives passion. And then to go and help other people by creating resources like this, doing the work that you're doing, this is what sort of keeps us going as well. Do you see what I mean? It's like an important part of it. And I think I always tried to squash that anger away, but now I think I embrace it a lot more and think I need this anger for passion to be able to make change.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we need that. And I think so often we're told to just not feel angry about anything. But actually, that anger for me is a motivation that actually, that is, like you said, it drives me further forward. And I think it can be, when used in the right way, it can be a really, really helpful emotion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it ties in so much, like the way that NHS eating disorder services are run. It ties in so much with the charities like First Steps and the other charities who are trying to pick up everybody around it, pick up the people on waiting lists, the people who've been turned away, the people who are told they're not thin enough, people who don't feel like they have an eating disorder because they don't look like they do. People often, that being people in larger bodies or people from maybe like Black and ethnic minority communities that just don't, that are just not represented. So I think there's so many different elements of so many different barriers here to people even recognizing that there's a problem in the first place. As you said, that's a hurdle in itself. Being able to advocate for themselves at the GP, being able to maybe just think that they're worthy enough to contact somewhere like First Steps or an eating disorder charity, because some people might think, well, that's maybe I can't go there. You know, we see people with maybe, you know, a diagnosed eating disorder and just think, well, I haven't got that, so I don't deserve help. So I think I just really want to say that even if you're just struggling with food a little bit, this is why we wanted to make these resources. So it's like, if you're struggling a little bit and you haven't got a diagnosis, that's okay. You still deserve help.
Yeah.
If you're someone on a waiting list, like, you know, it's so hard to be stuck in that limbo. Like, you know, you need help. Everybody, as you said right at the start, everyone deserves help.
Yeah, they definitely do, and I think it's so hard that the support isn't out there. But I do think the more noise we make, and the more stories we tell, and the more pressure we put on, actually, we are going to make that change.
Absolutely, I love that. The more noise we make, I think we all get to be very noisy. That's really good. We'll put a link to Dump the Scales with this so that anybody watching can go and sign that petition, because it's really important. And you know where to follow you on social media and stuff. Yeah, I think unless you've got anything else that you'd like to add, then you know, yeah, we can finish. And I'd just like to thank you so much. I feel like this has just been an amazing conversation today, and the work that you do is so incredible. So thank you so
Oh,
much.
thanks so much for having me. No, I really enjoyed it.
Good. I'm really glad. Thank you. Take care.
Cool. Thank you.